How many are wearing purple? Yes, we got a number of those. And they're playing the New York Jets. Okay. Are they supposed to win? All right. Yeah, of course they're supposed to win. All right. Well, I'm not going to ask. Oh, it'll come, Lee. Just hang in there. It's coming. That PowerPoint thing always takes a little bit. At least it has the rest of the day. So give it a second, because we're going to talk a little bit about football. We're going to talk about getting in the game. How many of you ever sat on the bench? Yep. Do you like sitting on the bench? Do you know you have an important job when you sit on the bench?
Support your team.
Support your team, yeah. Yeah, I have to be reminded of that. I hate sitting on the bench, especially when I pay to play ball. And I get there and think, ah. And sometimes it seems like you're always the first one. But this year they were pretty good. I didn't have to do it very often. I hope I don't have to keep talking. But I might have to. All right, I got to tell you what's in the video. Kurt Warner was a football. He probably still thinks he's a football player, but they call it the Cinderella story about him. He was a young man, grew up in Iowa, and he actually lived in Cedar Rapids. And when he got out of college, nobody picked him up. Nope, he was just kind of a mediocre quarterback. At least that's what everybody thought. And so he ended up, he tried out, nothing happened. So then he went to, during the summer, he was bagging groceries at Hy-Vee. Imagine you could go to Hy-Vee and find out that, someday maybe that'll be the next quarterback and go to the Super Bowl. Because Kurt Warner did that for a while, and his wife was a nursing student, and then she went on to college, and he went on to be a nurse. So she worked all day, and he worked all night, and he was doing all this, and he just knew he should be into football. And so eventually he ended up getting called, and he wanted to go to the Packers, but they already had, well, he did go to the Packers for a while, and they had 3 other quarterbacks. He was 4th. And he ended up sitting on the bench for 4 years before they just let him go. Imagine, because Brett Favre was there and 2 other good ones, so he should have known better, but he thought, well, somebody's going to get hurt eventually. Fortunately, they didn't for the Packers, unfortunately for Kurt Warner. So then, then he finally ended up being called to the Arena Football League. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. And he did outstanding with the Arena Football League. He had just more passes caught than anybody else, like 800 complete passes. And I'm trying to remember all this because I took it out of my notes because I had it in a video. So, but he ended up, he was looking really good at this Arena Football, and then the Rams picked him up. They saw him, and they called him to come and play, and St. Louis Rams weren't doing all that great. And so he came, and he was still the 2nd quarterback. But the first guy, Trent something, huh?
Green.
Thank you. Trent Green got hurt, like pretty early in the season. And so here goes Kurt Warner. And Kurt Warner gets called in, and the team was a little reluctant, but the coach said, he goes, we're going to play good football, we're going to place Kurt Warner, and he's going to be our starting quarterback. And Kurt Warner led them to the Super Bowl. In fact, they won the Super Bowl that year. They went from a team that had already lost the year before, had lost all but 2 games, and this year they had only lost 2 games. And he led them, and he had the most passes. He had over 40 complete passes. He ended up into the 40-plus club, where a number of those giant football player quarterbacks are. He had a 65.1% completion rate. He had 41 touchdowns, is what it was, not just passes, 41 touchdowns. And after the 2nd Super Bowl, so he took them twice to the Super Bowl. The Rams, they lost the 2nd one in 2002. And then eventually, he had a bunch of mistakes and things weren't going good, so they let him go. And he went a couple of seasons popping around. Then he ended up at the Cardinals. And Arizona needed this guy, but now he's 30-some years old, 36, 37 years old. And they're thinking he's just going to be a backup, if we absolutely have to have somebody. But he ended up being a great encourager, ended up being a guy that really helped, and he invested in some of his players, and he ended up bringing the Cardinals. Ended up passing for 4,583 yards that season, which was the second best yardage output of his entire career in one season. And he also tied for third with 30 touchdowns. He kept that great completion rate. And he ended up taking the Cardinals from virtually non-existence to the Super Bowl. And he ended up taking them twice as well, I believe, but the second time they did. They did lose that one because Pittsburgh got a touchdown in the last couple of seconds. But you wouldn't know it, but like I said, for 4 seasons he sat on the bench and sitting there, and he didn't give up. He kept at it and kept in the game. In all, Warner owns or shares multiple records, including several important ones postseason. Not bad for a guy who was bagging groceries. Kurt never gave up, and when the opportunity came, he was still ready to play. We will never get in the game if we aren't ready to play. No matter your position, no matter your skill, if you aren't prepared and ready, you will never get off the bench. The Christian faith is a long-term game. There are 2 end zones. There's heaven and there's hell. It doesn't go anywhere else. There are 2 teams. There's God's team, Jesus' team, or there's Satan's. This game has eternal ramifications. We are in this game. We are, we can be spectators and just watch what's going on, but there are other spectators that are watching, those of us that are in the game. From Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore we are surrounded by such a huge crowd of witnesses to the life of faith. Let us strip off every weight that slows us down, especially the sin that so easily trips us up, and let us race with endurance. Let us run with endurance the race God has set before us." We look out onto the field and we see all the stars, the MVPs. We see those that are serving in exotic places, and we think, wow, that would be so cool to do what they're doing. Janice Catrone from this church, long ago, she married Mitchell, who actually was the one that kind of restarted this before it closed the last time. Janice is a dean of nursing at the Haiti Wesleyan School of Nursing right now. She goes down 2 weeks down to Haiti, and then she comes home to Missouri for 2 weeks, and then she goes back down to Haiti. But they have the most nurses in the program that they've ever had, serving in Haiti. And one of the things that she requires of her nurses to graduate is that they have to be able to lead somebody to Jesus Christ. And they have to have done it before they are allowed to graduate from her program. And that's what so she's not just investing in nurses. She's investing in eternity by these women, these men and women, becoming evangelists at the same time. Andrea Swardhouse, who was here last Thanksgiving, she's been in the Japanese field for over 11 years. She has given herself to the Japanese people so that even one more person will be able to reach that end zone. There are those that, that have those mega churches around the world, and there's others that serve in compassion and evangelism. There's there's ministries that use the internet and other media to spread the word. Yet behind all of those faces, there are millions of others that went before them and are in the game now, and they serve less glamorous ways, and they don't get any attention. That single mom who works 2 jobs and makes sure she tells her kids about Jesus and gets them to church and makes sure that they don't miss Sunday school and make sure that they're there, she's going to make it to that end zone because she is in the battle and she is in the game serving. And those that go to the Salvation Army and are serving up soup, those are serving, and they're in the game, right where God wants them to be. They're doing the work that God has called them to do. That's being in the game. Oswald Chambers shared with his students, it's a matter of indifference where you are. Whichever way God engineers circumstances, the duty is to pray. Never allow the thought, I am no use where I am, because you certainly cannot be of any use where you are not. Wherever God has dumped you down in circumstances, pray. That's a good thing to remember. We might complain and might not think we're doing very much where we are, but like Oswald Chambers reminds us, we can't do anything where we're not. We have to be right where we are, and we have to be in the game from where we are. Being a Christian is not meant to be a spectator sport. It is a team sport. We are not saved, brought into the family of God to sit on the sidelines and wait till we die. That's not the plan. We are called to go, to serve, to grow, to mature, to love. And those are all verbs. There is nothing about riding the bench. There is nothing in the Bible about retirement, just waiting until your life is gone. We are called to have our faith ready to get out on that field. In the Bible, there was a young man who was so not in the game that he wasn't even invited to dinner that day. And I want you to follow along with me, and we're going to be in our Bibles in 1 Samuel chapter 16. It's in and we're going to read verse 1, and then I'll jump down to verse 5. So I don't have the page number. 226. Thank you. So page 226 in your Pew Bibles. Chapter 16, verse 1, and then I'll jump down to verse 5. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem, and I have chosen one of his sons to be king." Then drop down to verse 5. Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord hasn't chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, and Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "Well, they're still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but he is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent for him and had him brought. He was ruddy and with fine appearance and had handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And then from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel then went to Ramah. Probably keep your Bibles open. We're going to be in them again in a little bit. But David was so not in the game that he wasn't even invited. He was out taking care of sheep. His dad didn't even think enough of him to bring him along. He's a baby, he's the youngest, nobody's going to call him for anything. He's nobody special. So he wasn't even considered to get the special blessing that day. Taking care of sheep is not a glamorous job. It would have been worse than sitting on the bench. But there seems to be no thought of him until Samuel says, "Is this all the sons you have?" I mean, you think if you passed 7 in front of him, he'd have been pretty happy and picked somebody. But he needed that youngest one there. And here's David. He finally gets there, and all David ends up, at this time, he's known for being he's the youngest, he's taking care of sheep. And then after the dinner, after he gets anointed, what is supposed to happen to him? He went back to the sheep. He got sent back out there. Well, now we're done. Go back and eat. Go back and take care of those sheep. And later, he is called to be a musician at the king's court. He is called to come, and because he can play the harp. Not too many guys can really stand up and say that they play the harp. But here, David can play the harp so beautifully, and Saul has some problems with depression. So they've called David in. They find out he plays the harp, and he comes in and he's a musician. So now David goes between Saul and his dad. He takes care of sheep and he plays the harp for the king. And then while he's in the king's service, he also becomes an armor bearer. He starts learning the rules of war. He starts learning what an armor bearer does. He's the guy that carries the shield in front of everybody else. That wouldn't be something most of us would want to do, but that's what, he was being taught to be a warrior. So that's what David's doing, and he's going back and forth between King Saul and his dad's house. Still, David is still the youngest in Jesse's family, and he's still required to go home and take care of those sheep. It's during this team that the next event happens and changes David from a bench warmer to someone that is definitely in the game. So if you want to go to chapter 17, we're going to start at verse 17 and see the change in David's life and how he was ready for this day in a number of ways. Now Jesse said, we're going to start on verse 17 to 17. Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit and see how your brothers are and bring some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock with the shepherd, loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle positions. Shouting a war cry, Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies and ran to the battle lines and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now the Israelites have been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his father's family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing around him, "What will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here, and with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the man answered him as before. And then what David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. Now jump down to verse 40. I don't want to go through all of Saul's thing, we'll be here for quite a while. So verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hands, this is David, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his pouch in his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked at David and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with the sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down, cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will show that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistines moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck the Philistine and killed him. David ran over and stood over him, and he took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. He got in the game. David is basically, at the beginning of this passage, a glorified delivery boy. Dad says, "We need to check on your brothers. They're out fighting the battle. Pack up some cheese and bread and take them out there and see how your brothers are doing." And so that's what he does. We had a speaker in Orlando once at a youth convention. Kevin Myers said, "He was a pizza delivery boy." Basically, he got bread and cheese, and he's delivering pizza. And so that's kind of the idea. His dad didn't send him out there to fight a battle. He sent him out there to give him some food. He was expecting him back home pretty quickly. So when we look closer, we see that David has been being prepared for this for a long time. David had both practical experience and spiritual experience because he kept his head in the game, even while he was sitting on the bench. Saul told David he was too small and too young to fight like a giant like the lion. Yet David told him, he goes, I've been taking care of my father's sheep all these years. I've killed a lion, I've killed bears, and God has always taken care of me. He's always watched over me. And if I can do that with the Lord's help, I can beat this guy Goliath. We can do that. He said, the Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. David had had practice with critters that were much larger than David. Yet he had taken care of them. And God had given him strength. So David had confidence. And you need that if you're going to go out and play a game, right? You can't get out there and think you can't do it. Because you for sure will fulfill that easily. So he knew that he could fight something bigger than him. David also knew God. He had matured in his faith and he had sat out under the stars every night taking care of them sheep. And he had used that time productively. Some of the Psalms reflect that when you look back at David's Psalms. Talks about how he knows the majesty of God and he sees God's handiwork in the skies and how God prepared and created the world and created him. And he knew that his Lord was with him. And so he had used that time productively. And then while he was with King Saul, he was being prepared as a armor bearer. So he was learning about war, learning about being a soldier. So he had a lot of practical experience that he just basically hadn't been able to use yet. David had been communing with God often, so he understood training and he understood obedience to his father and submitting to the leadership of a coach. He continued to use this opportunity to grow and mature his faith as a person. So when Samuel had called him in from the sheep to be anointed, we don't see a guy that's puffed up with himself. He was obedient to his father. And that has a lot to do with being a good team player. To be somebody that is willing to listen to the coach and be in following the play plan, the playbook. David was called to serve the king, and he did that just as responsibly. He served the king and was faithful in carrying out his duties, though they were far from glamorous. As an armor bearer, imagine he was hoping, it's hard to imagine hoping you could go out to war and hold the shield and see how quick, how many that's probably one of those jobs that they had to keep replacing. But he was willing to do that and learn about being an armor bearer. So as, again, his father called him and gave him a task, and he was obedient, and he went to the field to carry out his task. So as he came home, he continued to be obedient to his father, Jesse. Now remember, Kurt Warner, he sat on the bench for 4 years, and he left the Giants. Then he played semi-pro ball for a few years before getting on a professional roster again. He didn't just sit around and wait. He was practicing. He was honing his skills. He stayed in shape. Ever since David's anointing, he had been benched. Yet he didn't give up. He kept on doing what he needed to do. He did the next thing that God asked him to do. Jesus calls all believers to go and make disciples. And he says to be his witnesses. We can do that in several ways. We can do that by our actions and our attitudes. We must all remember that the players on the bench do play a big role in the game. The intensity and the morale of the players on the bench have a huge influence on the players on the court. Even if we aren't in the spotlight, or if we're not doing something we feel is significant, we are still a part of the team, and we can be in the game. Even when we're not on the field, we are still in the game. We need to put the team before ourselves. Now, there are 5 simple tips to help us to do that. First, we need to bring lots of energy. Be ready. Be an encourager. Be a cheerleader. Encourage your teachers and your pastors that are out on the front teaching. Encourage those that lead worship. It's tough getting up here every week. I mean, they have to come up with the music. They have to send me all the slides, all the lyrics. They have to practice. They spend time on Saturday or whatever day they take to practice. And that's all their free time. They all work full-time jobs. So they do that every week. 2/3 of the team are not paid. They're volunteers. And so they work together and bring this together every single Sunday. When we work with enthusiasm and grateful hearts, that encourages them. It makes them better. And that happens in our teams. I know when we're playing ball, I know that's nothing like playing a big football game, but encouraging your team, shouting and encouraging the other players, it helps them to play better. I know I play better when I'm being encouraged instead of being told, you miss the ball and they yell and do all sorts of fun things once in a while. But when you're encouraging each other, it helps you to do better. Number 2, attitude. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit saps a person's strength. Your attitude has so much to do with how your game is going, doesn't it? Bridget plays soccer, right? So if you have a really bad attitude, how is your game? Not very good. I like watching some of the guys I play with. I shouldn't pick on them, but they're not here. When they get mad and they've missed a ball, and if they start getting angry, they almost miss every single time they're up to bat after that, because they are so mad. And then they take it out, and then it kind of just brings our whole team down, no matter how good they are. If they get angry and frustrated, it rubs off on the whole team, and you're almost for sure going to lose. Even if you were ahead, it seems like we lose our leads when somebody gets upset. And that's what, our attitude has so much to do with our lives and how we approach everything. Number 3, don't ruin your teammates' mental state. Hebrews 10:25 says, "And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." We need to encourage each other. That's what the church is to do, to come together, encourage each other, encourage other believers. That's why coming to church is important, because that's the day of the week that God has set aside for us to worship him and to encourage each other. And that's another reason small groups are important too. It helps us to grow and mature in our faith so much better when it's like iron, our iron sharpens iron. And so when we get together and we study together, we learn and we grow so much faster. Number 4, watch what your opponent is doing. 1 Peter 5:8 says, "Stay alert, watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." The enemy is out there all around us, and he wants us to lose. Even if we're in the game, he wants us to be on the losing team. So he is out there to trip us up. He is out there to discourage you. He is out there to tear the church apart. So we need to be very mindful and very watchful. We need to stay alert and help him. We need to watch his plays and get on the other side of it. Number 5, stay ready. Romans 12:13 says, "When God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality." 1 Timothy 6:18 says, "Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others." And 1 Peter 3:15 says, "Instead, you must worship Christ as Lord of your life. And if someone asks you about your hope as a believer, always be ready to explain it." And 1 Peter 4:1 said, "So then, since Christ suffered physical pain, you must arm yourselves with the same attitude he had and be ready to suffer too. For if you have suffered physically for Christ, you are finished with sin." The true joy and satisfaction in the journey of faith comes when we are ready on the bench, when we're ready and prepared to go out onto the field. We must not quit before the game is done. Don't assume it's over until it's over. We must stay in the game. We must be ready and we must persevere. God wants all believers to be in the game and to play to win. There is too much at stake for us to only be a spectator. Let's pray. Dear Father, today as a number of us will be watching football games, Lord, I help us to remember too that there are many players that are sitting on that bench that don't get in the game, but yet they're part of that team. And Lord, we can be an encourager like those. We can be a part of our team, even if God hasn't called us to be up front. If God has called us to serve in any way, help us to remember our part, to be ready, to serve, to follow, to encourage, to cheer each other on, so that our team, which we know when we get to the end of the book, does win. But Father, we want to have some winning battles on the way. And Lord, help us to truly be in the game. And to this week, every time we think of a game, Father, I pray that we think of how we are to be a part of the game as well. And Lord, we just bring this day to you, we bring this week to you, and thank you for who you are. In your name we pray. Amen. You better stand with us. We'll sing the last song together.